monthly May webinar. My name is Faye Augustin, and I'm an Associate Director for the Blue Trails Program with American Rivers. I'm really glad that you guys are all able to join us today. So today we will be hosting a webinar, Planning for Recreation and Conservation with Diverse Stakeholder Groups. And we're joined by two lovely ladies with Southwest Decision Resources that group offers experience support for collaborative decision-making processes. And I'll introduce them more a little bit later. A couple quick housekeeping items before we get started. Some technical support. If your connection is lost, log in again using your unique web link and passcode that was provided to you when you registered with GoToWebinar. And as always, this webinar is being recorded and will be available at bluetrailsguide.org/webinar this coming Friday, June 3rd. And then also I encourage you to ask any and all questions that you have during the webinar. You can submit a question at any time via the question box, which is in the side panel of your GoToWebinar pop-up box. And then those questions will be answered in the last 5 minutes or so of the webinar by Tani and Andy. And any questions that are not answered will be available on the Blue Trails Guide website after the webinar. So we'll go back and answer any questions that were asked during the webinar. And again, there is another link for you to view the webinar and questions once the webinar is recorded and posted. So without further ado, I want to introduce our two speakers and presenters for today. As I mentioned, we have Tani Robertson, who is a director with Southwest Decision Resources, and Andy Rogers, who is a senior program associate with Southwest Decision Resources. And they'll be walking us through work that they do to help plan for recreation and conservation with diverse stakeholder groups. So with that, I will go ahead and leave it to you two. Thank you so much.
Thanks, Faye. Yeah, my name's Tani Robertson, and I'll kick us off here. If you want to, I guess I'm the one who's moving the slides. The outline of what we're going to talk about in this very brief presentation, a little bit about who we are and how we work, some case examples, and just a subset of the tools that we often use, and then end and have a little bit of time for your questions. And we are preparing materials that would get posted and shared, so there's a lot of potential material that we can share with you that we will do that following the webinar, just to let you know. It's slow there, Faye.
We're waiting.
Maybe Andy, why don't you start out with our next slide while we're waiting for it to. There.
Okay, here we go. Good morning, everyone. My name is Andy Rogers, and I also work for Southwest Decision Resources, and this is the face of our team. There's the left in the blue hat, and I'm located directly under her, just so you can envision who we are. We're a small facilitation group based in Arizona. There's a team of 6. 4 of us are located in Tucson, Tani being one of those, and I am located in Flagstaff. And we work with partners on complex planning, decision-making, problem-solving processes, primarily in natural resources, participation, and informed processes, and higher quality outcomes. We really consider ourselves partners for the long haul. We're not meeting managers, but we think more of ourselves as collaboration designers. A little bit about what we do, again, primarily working in natural resources and community issues. A lot of work in watershed restoration, conservation, forest management, grazing, youth, and the other things you can see listed there. Community visioning, strategic planning. We work with agencies, both state, local, federal organizations, universities and communities, really a broad host of partners that we work alongside with, also underrepresented stakeholders. We're based in the Southwest, and that's where we do the majority of our work, although we do work in the broader Western United States as well, and most recently in Alaska and Mexico as well. We provide support for collaborative processes, jurisdictional settings. We provide assessment and design, which facilitation and mediation, sometimes negotiation, strategic planning, coaching, mentoring, and training. We really try to run the gamut of everything from a conversation on the phone for someone who really just needs help through a process to large stakeholder groups moving forward. We're committed to long-term partnerships and think of ourselves really navigating our very complex, often contentious, and it's sort of our goal to help navigate through that in a way where we have long solutions. So we're going to roll through a few examples and tools that we find most helpful. The first of which I think talks about stakeholders when we get there. Pardon the webinar.
Go ahead and start.
Stakeholder assessment is a big process. As you can see here, this is what we call a stakeholder map. And really, it's important to define who your stakeholders are. And those can be a broad array of people. You can see here, this is a map that we actually used getting some folks together on the Finger Lakes State National Forest. This is a tool that we use where oftentimes we'll sit down with stakeholders and have them think about who their stakeholders are. And they can display those in different geographical ways, and it really talks about the complexity of putting this together. We often do assessment in the early part of putting a process together where we will sit down either one-on-one or on the phone and really connect with people and have short interviews and discuss their ideas on a particular process. This is good in terms of getting to know the participants, allowing them to have one-on-one time with us, and really demonstrating the beginning of a committed relationship that is neutral, which is really important.
Yeah, and I just want to add that it doesn't have to be professional facilitators that do this, but reaching out and having these conversations with your key partners or potential partners obviously is an important first step.
Yes. Thanks. So we're going to spend a little bit of time talking about some adaptive management we've been working on. Primarily, this has been in the field of grazing allotment renewal and looking at rangeland conditions. And so the first one I'm going to talk about is one that we've been working on in Kingman, Arizona, here for the last couple of years. It was a grazing permit renewal that there was a lot of controversy surrounding it, and their first NEPA document was met with the folks weren't appreciative of it and wanted to take a second look at it. And so the BLM put together this Resource Advisory Council, which is a set of people chosen that represented the public, environmental groups, state and federal agencies, the tribes, and we put this new adaptive assessment. And this was really pretty cutting edge. It was the first time that we'd worked on one. It was the first one that had been done in Arizona, and it was adaptive in terms of we actually defined triggers and thresholds on the rangeland condition, and if those were met, it would trigger different grazing regimes. And so it was a really interesting process, and it's got a collaboration moving forward that's just starting, and if we do a phase 2, I'll give you an update on that. But again, part of our adaptive management work that we've been working on.
And just a note on this is one tool is this is a subcommittee within the BLM's Resource Advisory Council, which allows it to be FACA compliant for any of you who are thinking about the Federal Advisory Committee Act. Okay. Next is in Las Ciénegas National Conservation Area, which is in southeast Arizona. The BLM has a national conservation area there, and that is mostly grazing, but also riparian and natural resources. 10 plus years ago, the agency manager and the rancher initiated a more collaborative planning process that actually has some origins in holistic resource management. And there's fall and spring what they call biological planning field meetings. And then there's technical teams that meet in between those. There's been strong participation for over 10 years where there's monitoring that gets done and then results shared, discussed in the field by stakeholders, plans and decisions adapted based on that input. So it's an example of collaborative adaptive management. And next is, two tools that we've used there and in other places. One is called a shared history that is an interactive way for participants to kind of create a collective history of a place. Watersheds are especially suitable for this. And then you hear all the different voices. It really builds on, acknowledges all the good work that's been done before, as well as allows for people to take a step back and take a look at the patterns emerging, some lessons. Maybe they see that drought has happened repeatedly over time, or it's gotten more intense. It just enables some really good dialogue. And in some cases, that last bullet, there's a few watersheds we've worked with where they've actually taken it to the next level and digitized the timeline and have continued to add to it, and there's some really good interactive timeline tools now. And again, go ahead.
I just wanted to add one thing on that. We just recently used this tool, and it was particularly helpful for new participants as well. So where you've got, say, a group that's worked together for 20 or a long, long time, it's super helpful for new and emerging board members or participants because they can look back on this timeline. So I found that recently. It was really helpful for new stakeholders.
And again, in the materials that we share, we'll share like a link to one of the digital versions of this. And any of the materials we're sharing now, we can share more with any of you that are interested. Okay, and then youth engagement. We're working on youth engagement in several places, building collaboration and better alignment between natural resource managers, and groups that work with youth. And one of them that's more innovative is in Las Ciénegas, where we're doing that adaptive management effort. And it's called Youth Engaged Stewardship. And youth are not only going out on the land and learning about things, they're actually doing monitoring. They have projects, they have a budget. They're actually being leaders. And we'll share that link as well for any of you who are interested. So in terms of recreation, we are working in 3+ forests, national forests in Arizona and probably beyond that soon, on what's called sustainable recreation. And it's an all hands, all lands approach, cross-boundary approach to outdoor recreation planning and then aligning partners to actually get stuff done on the ground. Through that process in central Arizona, trail planning was prioritized as a key area of need. And so the Greater Prescott Trails planning effort got started from that. And it is it's a collaborative process to identify and prioritize new trail projects in the Greater Prescott area, which is several jurisdictions, local as well as federal. And we have a coordinating team that includes motorized and non-motorized. And that coordinating team is it's the Stewardship Forum, which is a collaborative that emerged through the preceding effort on sustainable recreation. And we've had a series of coordinating team meetings as well as large public workshops to basically identify probably a few hundred different potential projects, trail-related projects, and then a whole prioritization process with criteria and sub-areas, and happy to share more details. Long and short is they came up with a set of short-term high-priority trail projects, and then the municipalities and Forest Service ran those through their filters and decided which ones that they would move forward on, which is kind of closing the loop on a collaborative process. And now that is ongoing with annual workshops, and it's tied into when the agencies make their decisions on what they're going to spend money on regarding trail projects. And then one specific tool that we want to share, it's not really a tool, but it's an approach that is very slowly coming to light here. Okay. It's just the concept of co-convening. One of our core principles is to foster more shared leadership of these collaborative efforts so that you really have buy-in, shared responsibility. No one organization or agency has to shoulder the burden. In this case, it's the Collaborative Stewardship Forum. And as you can see, as we actually had them all the key interests were part of the welcome to this big public workshop. And so any one person in that workshop could see somebody up there that they trusted, whether it was the motorized person or the Forest Service, hiking, whatever. It's just been a really key to success, I think, in all good collaboration, or much of the collaboration. Okay, and then, so on the other side of a small mountain is the Verde Watershed. If you head due east, which is north of Phoenix, if you're familiar with this region, and a collaborative group like that Stewardship Forum was formed in the Verde Watershed, and a lesson that we haven't noted here is that collaboratives, a place-based approach is oftentimes the most effective. You can have coordination at larger scales, but to really get strong local identity and collaborations, as you well know, we're probably preaching to the choir here. It's helpful if you're part of one geographic area that has natural connections to each other. And in this area, actually, several years prior, there was what was called a social network mapping process that identified the geographic areas where people actually do connect with each other. And all the subsequent planning by the Prescott National Forest followed those natural boundaries and not their jurisdictional boundaries, which is a credit to them. So in the Verde side, and they called it the Verde Front, they created their own name. And we've been working there for, well, probably 8 years, but about 6 years on the collaboration that's going on there. So what we've got developed is more, it's more developed there than in some of the other places we're working on sustainable recreation. So we have the recreation bubble, and the Verde Front is the name of that collaborative. And we're going to talk about some of the specific circles within that. Concurrent to that, we're working with the Verde Watershed Restoration Coalition, which is more on the conservation side. And several teams have formed there. And then in the middle, the purple, are cross-cutting teams that really relate to recreation and restoration, monitoring youth engagement, funding volunteerism, watchable wildlife, and we're starting to organize a large State of the Watershed event. So, and then in orange are the leadership groups of the whole effort. So, Andy, oh wait, you're going to talk about who in 1 second. Go ahead.
Oh yes. So, like Donnie said, this group has been going on for a long time. There are multiple partnerships, multiple sort of working groups trying to work on Verde watershed issues, and we've got local governments. You can see several towns, cities, and counties here, several organizations, American Rivers, there you are, small trail coalitions, Nature Conservancy, colleges, local businesses. This is an active area of recreation and vineyards if you've not been there, and several state, local, federal agencies as well, the Yavapai Apache Nation and tribes, and we have been facilitating this since its inception. So, like Tony mentioned, we've got several, lots of work going on the recreation side, lots on the restoration side, and then there's a lot of overlap. And one of the things on the recreation side I was going to spend a few minutes talking about is called the String of Pearls. And in the Verde watershed, river recreation is on the increase. There's more and more each year. The issues are complex. We've got a lot of invasive species in that area. There's a series of diversions and have private water supply. And so we've been working on this idea of the String of Pearls. And so this river, it includes the Verde River, it also includes tributaries and some ephemeral washes, and includes the areas of Sedona, Clarkdale, Jerome, Cottonwood, and Camp Verde. And what we have are this idea of these pearls, and these pearls would be these recreation amenities. The criteria is that they would be have access, they'd be publicly owned, locally managed, and those might include examples like state parks, town parks, riverfront events, access points, etc. And then these strings, and the string represents both the connectivity between the pearls, but it also represents really how the whole process works in terms of regional collaboration. And so we may have trails that are connecting these pearls, similar signage along the way, maps. We are creating a website that also has an interactive GIS public site. It hasn't been launched yet, but for example, if you were interested in visiting a pearl that had public parking and hiking, you could Google that, you could look at that on a website. So Tani's now going to talk about the structure of what makes this work so effectively.
Yeah, and I will note that the middle green bubble, geotourism, there was a partnership between the Sedona Verde Tourism Council, the Verde Front Effort, and National Geographic, and they put together this website that's that second picture. We'll include that web link as well, but that's been a major marketing effort where these pearls will also be available online. So in terms of the structure and leadership, the Leadership Council is a group of, it's all the elected officials, so it's mayors and county supervisors, and it's land management agency leaders. And they meet quarterly, and no one misses a meeting because it's their one-stop shop to see each other and identify emerging issues, work collaboratively regionally. They've all agreed on this lower right document is their charter. There's a consensus-based process, and this document outlines how all of the pieces fit together, the roles, responsibilities, how decisions are made, etc. And they've done a series of presentations to town and county councils to build that kind of buy-in, and they agreed by consensus to this document. These green boxes above are where we're going to share a few key lessons or tools. So the importance of foundational documents is one kind of tip or lesson that's helpful. And then this group really has gone further than a lot of collaboratives in actually creating a shared funding structure, and where all the agencies and local governments have agreed to, actually it's, I think in all cases, it's probably under $2,500 each per year, to keep the balls rolling, keep the facilitation and coordination moving this process forward, which is kind of the core aspect to sustainability of the effort. And happy to share more about this. So one of the fundamental, if you talk to a lot of collaboratives, I think that in many cases they started with some kind of cross-visit, some kind of exchange with another group that was doing something similar, or they were inspired by what another group is doing. In the case of the Verde Front and the String of Pearls, we actually had noticed that there was a really great effort in the Grand Junction area that the presentation we heard was actually called String of Pearls. That's where we got that, so we can't take credit for that. And we thought that there was so many similarities that one of our key partners got foundation funding, actually in this case Walton Family Foundation funding, to get all the elected officials and leaders. It was a group of about 20-25, and we went up to Grand Junction and met with the Riverfront Commission there. That's what several of these pictures are, to really learn all about it and have that time away, you know, time on buses, time together to really process it, build relationships, and think about what's relevant for our own place. And that you know, generated a lot of inspiration and kind of practical ideas, and that led to the really galvanized the Verde Front effort, as well as the Riverfront or River Recreation group. And on the note of cross visits, the value of peer-to-peer learning is so high that a number of us created what's called Cross-Watershed Network, which is really facilitating peer-to-peer learning among watershed practitioners, organizations, agencies, universities, the broad definition of watershed practitioner. And it's you can find it online at crosswatershed.net. The focus area geographically is the Arid West, and we're just starting a new program to provide incentives for cross visits. You can also sign up to be to get a profile online, and the whole thing is about facilitating, people more easily finding the right person in another watershed to talk about a particular problem you might have. And our annual workshops, Andy's going to describe briefly.
So we've had annual workshops for, I guess there's been 3 or 4 of them now. The first one was actually hosted in the Verde watershed, and there's also been one in the Escalante watershed and also in the Arkansas watershed. And so what happens is, you've got these people who are all struggling with similar watershed issues, and we've found that if you rotate which watershed hosts them, it's very effective. And so, so participants will join in a watershed. We'll have these usually 2-day meetings where we have case studies where watershed practitioners and managers can get together and really talk about what they're struggling with. And it's this completely invaluable peer-to-peer learning that we have. And so we usually have them in the fall, although we've decided this year to skip to the spring. So if you're interested, again, go to that crosswatershed.net if you're working on watersheds, and please join us.
Okay, our last example, and we have many more, but we had to just pick and choose for this. And this is to give you a kind of a little bit different example, but since the theme is community, this is a highly participatory process in the greater Tucson area for community visioning and scenario planning. And so I'm going to just describe it briefly, and then we're going to end on a couple other tools, and then that would be it. So imagine Greater Tucson. It started as some mid-level people, not agency leaders, who thought, we really need to get a handle on what's going to happen in the future as we grow. And we're going to lose all the things that keep us here if we don't kind of go forward with our eyes open. So we pulled together a whole bunch of people. We had a huge number of partners, and all the key local government planners were involved. We started out with understanding what people really care about and their values. Concurrent to that, we looked at, oh, it's coming in so slowly. There we go. We looked at where we had it, looking at just actual trends in, say, urban development and lot sizes and transportation and different kinds of things like that. And then we looked at what's going to be the disconnect, what values are going to be at risk. And that was all using a lot of geovisual tools to help people really get a handle on that. And then we went into a scenario building process with a lot of participatory mapping activities. John Freganisi and Associates out of Portland, Oregon, led that piece, and they've done work with Envision Utah and a number of other regional visioning efforts. And then out of that came this preferred future and vision for the area. And then, of course, comes actions and strategies after that. Let's see here. It's slowly coming up. Oh, maybe you should forward these. There we go. Using multiple methods for stakeholder engagement and going to the people are 2 things that we did. We had surveys, youth-specific surveys, a random sample survey, 51 community conversations where we actually went to people's organizations and they hosted them. We trained volunteers to be the facilitators of all those dialogues, and then a lot of comments on the scenarios. And but calling meetings ourselves and expecting everyone to come to us was the least successful of the approaches. Oops. So, and then lastly, the scenario version of this in other places can really be a helpful way to motivate people to want to work together on some of the harder issues in their areas. And lastly, the tool, one tool that we use a lot is what we call a process diagram, or just visual tools to help people understand the complex processes that we're working on. What's going to show up in a second is an example of a simple tool.
One more, Faye.
Difficulty on my end, so just give me one moment and keep talking, Tani.
Okay. So the a simple tool where you just kind of boil down a process to the bare essentials, and it just speaks to the public. So it was actually this that you cannot see. Let me try to forward one more time myself. It's basically 3 bubbles, and it boiled it down to talk plus think equals action, and phase 1, 2, 3, and it just, and then as we were in each phase, that bubble would be what was showing. So are we really not going to be able to forward anymore, Faye?
I'm trying to figure out what the issue is. I apologize.
That's right. So, and then what and then we usually have like a little red arrow that says we are here, so you can see it as you progress through the process. And then we have
an approach, Tani, a little bit.
Yeah, well then the next one that you can't see is an example. So we'll share all these in our post webinar materials. There's a simple diagram, but most of the times these processes follow a process what we call just an accordion approach, where you're kind of going in and out of, say, small team meetings, coming back to a core team or coordinating team, and then have these big public workshops. And so, because you can't get everything done in big public workshops, as you know, or just coordinating teams. So it's just kind of looking at the in and out, back and forth that you do, and you would naturally, you've all been part of those kinds of efforts. In that map, we also show how we're achieving outcomes as we go, not just at the end, because having results as you go is pretty important for keeping people interested and engaged. And then just our final comments. Andy, you want to mention the first 2? We have 4 final comments, and so you can't see it, but this is easier to just say.
Right, I have to remember them now. But the first one talked about
we'll keep these collaboratives that some collaboratives exist to create a plan or solve a single problem, build capacity for facilitation, for whatever, and the right kind of structure that will enable it to continue. Third is the use of a range of visualization tools, from maps effort is really important for these things to get designed based on best practice and managed and developed successfully. So that is all that we have, and now we have a questions question mark slide.
Yeah. The technical difficulties. So if there are any questions that folks have, I know we've gone a little bit over, but I'm happy to spend a little bit of time to answer any questions. I will send around, when I send the webinar, the recorded webinar link, I will also send around Tani and Andy's contact information so that you guys are able to reach out if you have any other further questions. But I've got one that's coming up. And so one quick question that folks seem to have is, and Tani or Andy, I kind of leave it up to you guys to decide who wants to answer this, but when you're working with large stakeholder groups, what's a good way to keep people engaged and keep them coming back? Like, is there a set number or a certain number of meetings that seem to kind of be good for keeping people engaged and not over participation, or are there other ways that you can ensure that different folks have buy-in?
Well, I'll just
as often as they can really demonstrates that the collaboration is worthwhile. And no one wants to have to return to foundational documents every time the meeting occurs. That can be really annoying for folks that have been there for a long time. But occasionally building that into the meeting structure, sort of what Tani was mentioning, where people recognize, where you are and where you're going, and there's an opportunity to really weigh into where you're going. And so returning to those sort of organizational goals and objectives of the project itself. And then again,
Connie, thank you so much for a really fantastic presentation and for being even greater presenters and rolling with the punches of technology.